Rick Bragg knows how to tell a good story, and growing up in rural Alabama, he has plenty to tell. His last book, All Over But the Shouting, told the tale of his mother Margaret and her tireless efforts to raise 3 sons alone. It became a bestseller, and like all good stories, it left readers wanting more. With his new book, Ava's Man, it tells the story of his maternal grandfather, Charlie Bundrum. Bragg is also a national correspondent for the New York Times. In 1996, he won a Pulitzer Prize for his coverage of the Oklahoma City bombing. I'm pleased to have him back at this table. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Ava's, why not call him Charlie? Why just the notion of the title, Ava's Man?
Because when I started to write the book about my grandfather, I started feeling guilty. And I realized that Ava was as much a part of the story as he was. One could have not been without the other, and they never would have got the family through the Depression without the other. And it was guilt and a few other things.
Yeah.
But, and she was, he was the only man she ever had.
She would read to him because he wanted to know what was going on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's one of the nice images that came out of it was, she was a little woman, and her reading to him when he would come in covered in tar. He was a roofer, among other things.
Yeah.
And it was one of the nice images that stayed with me.
Tell me what this is all about for you.
Well, it's pretty selfish. When I did the first book, I wanted to honor my mom, and it was no more complicated than that. This one, I wanted to build me a grandfather. I really didn't have one. I didn't know my grandfather on my daddy's side of the family real well. So when people started telling me I left out the good part, I left out the beginning when I did All Over But the Shouting, they told me that where it all started was with her family. And they being every little old lady that stopped me in an airport and pinched me on my cheek or grabbed me on my knee. And after about a few hundred or more tell you to do that, you might ought to listen to them.
Yeah.
But I knew that they wanted more about the family. But when I started thinking about it, it became very selfish. Very, very selfish. I got a grandfather. I'm 40 years old, and I went out and got me one. It's that simple.
And it means what to you?
It means an awful lot when you think that it's like people say about poor people. They say, you don't miss what you never had. Well, that's a stupid thing to say.
It certainly is.
That's the dumbest thing to say. I never, you hear it all the time. Usually it's rich folks who say it, but I wanted, I had heard glimmers and flashes. I knew that he was a carpenter. I knew that he was a riverman. I knew that
he could make boats out of
car hoods.
Car hoods.
And I knew that he made a little whiskey. Well, he made a lot of whiskey, but he made it in little increments over time. And I was fascinated by him, but I never got enough to satisfy. And when it came time to do this book, I did.
How do you go about this?
You talk to everybody you can talk to who knew him. You talk to everybody that knew him even a little bit. Some people that made the book only saw an image of him, like one distant cousin told me that she saw him once after he was roofing a house, and she saw him on the skyline, and she saw him stagger on the skyline. And I was always wondered if that was because he had gotten sick right before he died, or maybe he had a taste of his own product. But little images like that came together. Great stories, which my aunts and uncles told mostly. My mom told me 100 great stories. But it took a while to get them to really open up. It hurt them.
I mean, it's not like writing, it's not like writing about John Adams.
No.
Where there are thousands and thousands of letters and everything else, the kind of public document. This is mainly by word of mouth.
Well, they didn't read. Now, my grandma did. My grandma was a great reader and loved to read. But my grandfather didn't read or write. His father didn't read or write. And I strongly suspect that if you go pretty far back, there's no written history. There was nothing to go on except what people remembered. And it was hard, but it was also a lot more fun than spending time in a library, going through documents. Everything we heard had life to it. Every story about a fist fight had blood in it. Nothing about it was cut and dried and stayed, and that made it fun.
Yeah. I wonder if people remember more because that the power of those lives is so much more, because that is what they know. Do you know what I mean? They're not caught up in a larger world, they're caught up in a personal world.
Well, I think that,
and therefore it's more deeper and penetrating.
I think that's true because, you know, like for instance, the Great Depression, I tried to write about it through their hardship, through one family's hardship. They lost a child to it.
How'd they lose a child?
Just sickness,
Yeah.
you know, no good food, no doctor, no medicine.
Right.
It was a baby. And it is, everything about it was deeply personal. Just getting my aunts to talk about him at length was difficult because, as I say in the book, talking about his life would lead to thinking about his death. And they hated that. They hated that he died, and that was 40 years ago.
He died when he was 51, how, 51?
He died, I was born in 1959, and he died in 1958. And I missed him by 1 year.
What was the best thing about him?
In a time, I think, when the country was drowning in its poor, he walked with his chin in the air and his teeth bared, and he protected the people the best he could from the hardships. When his daughters talk about him, they talk about the gentleness in him. Well, I obviously never saw that. I just heard it. But I can see him. I can see him working himself half to death. I can see him fighting to keep his dignity. I can see all that. I just think it's the fact that in a time when things were real bad, he, I guess, you know, in the book I say that history gave him a demon, gave him a dragon, and he beat the mortal hell out of it.
The dragon was the Depression.
And the poverty that bracketed it, just, you know, the everyday poverty that they lived with.
The Depression was the most powerful outside influence on my father's life. Easy. I mean, he would talk about it. I mean, he would never borrow money. I mean, he paid everything for cash after that.
You know, they loved, I think, historians who I did borrow from, you know, in this book, but historians love to say that we're shaped by the Civil War. The Civil War is what shaped us. It's what made us who we are. That may be true for the gentility. It may be true for a lot of people. But that's not true for blue-collar working people in the Deep South. It's just not true.
I agree.
You know, they remember the Depression, and they can still take you to the graves, and they can remember the name of every brain-dead animal they ever wrestled with to get it across a field. They remember that. They can't tell you who fought at Gettysburg. You know, they just don't care about it.
Do you find this, I mean, the drive in you is because you want to know you want a grandfather.
Sure.
You know, you want to understand your mother.
Sure.
You want to celebrate your mother. Is it satisfying work?
It's about the most fun I've ever had. And the thing about the book...
you are a Pulitzer Prize winner. You are a New York Times reporter.
Well, and I've done some stories that were difficult. You know, we did the Oklahoma City bombing. We've done terrible stories. We've written awful, sad stories. And they became personal, you know, over time. The Timothy McVeigh execution was personal, you know. All those things become personal.
How is it personal?
Well, because you can't not feel for the people who've been ripped apart by those events. You got to feel something for them. This was different because it started with us. You know, it's the difference between shaking a stranger's hand and feeling something, feeling a connection, and having one of your great aunts wrap their arms around you. I mean, it's that different connection. This was us. It was our people, and the events didn't shake or shape a country. Or, you know, I doubt very seriously if Charlie's fist fight with two Georgia State Highway patrolmen in a beer joint called the Maple on the Hill ever made a newspaper. But it was a big deal in that part of West Georgia. So it was personal, and it was fun because it was personal.
I mean, do you think that you will always stay there in terms of as a source of material?
I think I'll always stay there because it's about the only thing I know anything about.
Do you live in New Orleans?
I live in New Orleans. But New Orleans it's chock full of people, great writers who live in New Orleans and love to write about New Orleans. But I'm getting to really know these folks. I'm getting to really know the people from the foothills of the Appalachians, which is much different from the Appalachians. It's a slightly different world, and it's fun. Yeah, I want to do a novel someday.
I was just going to come to that. I mean, you've got to sort of think, I can create character because I have met characters.
100 stories we can't put in a book about family because they wouldn't let me come home for Thanksgiving. I'm not going to risk. I'm not going to risk having not getting fed in November. For another chapter.
No, exactly, it's not worth it. No, it's not worth it. It's not a good deal.
My aunt Juanita told me this great story after the book was done. They got 1 million stories when the book is published, and she told me this great story about. She said, I liked that book, but I wish you could have got in there about the time Daddy ran over Clem Ritter's head.
Yes.
And I was dumbfounded. And it was 30 minutes into the conversation before I realized that Clem Ritter was a dog. And then she was saying, it made her head all womp-sided, but she lived. And I was so grateful when the truth came out, I didn't know what to say. So, I mean, that's what I wanted. I've been real lucky to do 2 good books about family and that people have responded to. And now it's time to...
So you think a novel may be next?
I think it has to be. I get to do some really good stuff for the Times, and I think I don't want to do another book I don't want to do another true to life book. I don't think not right now.
Does it take any toll at all, or is it all just satisfying?
It takes a toll. There's always going to be a phrase or something that some member of your family is going to say, "Boy, I wish he hadn't said that," or "He got that wrong." But I
mean your psyche.
Well. If what you get when you're done is people by the hundreds coming up to you and saying, "Son, you stole my story," if what you get is people lining up to say, "That's my daddy," and they'll put their finger over the picture like that, and they'll say, "That's my daddy."
Yeah.
And there's no downside to that. So that makes you feel about as good as I think you're going to feel. It's hard to spend all your weekends and your late nights.
I think the reason for that, and I think that's absolutely true, the reason for that is twofold. One is that so many of human emotions are shared.
Yeah.
I mean, the gift of the novelist and the gift of someone who captures one person is, in a sense, you, through your own craft and skill set, can give expression to it. And these emotions are shared. The love of a mother for a child, the love of a father for pride in a hard day's work. All of that is something. Embarrassment, celebration, fear, shame, pride, jealousy.
And all those things, I think the only difference between my mother and my kinfolks and Charlie Bunram and Ava is I just happen to tell stories for a living. That's what
not a bad way to go.
No, it's not. And I was lucky because they were interesting.
Yeah.
They were interesting, and the combination of those things, it's just blind luck.
Yeah.
But when you see, like, there's a guy who worked in Vice in Atlanta, called me up, and the news assistant said, "Rick, there's Atlanta Vice on the phone." I thought, "Oh God, what'd I do?"
What do they know?
Right, what do they know? And I actually searched my mind for a moment, wondering. No, I thought, no, I'm good. I'm good. And it was just and it was just a very hard-bitten, not hard-bitten, but a very tough man of about my age, maybe a little bit older, who said that I wrote the story about his mama and my.
Ava was his mama.
No, actually the one about my mom. My mom said
right.
I wrote, and it happens over and over again with these kind of tough old boys who come to the book signings, and they haven't been to a book signing before. Yeah. And they come there. I hadn't been many, but they come to the book signing and they want to talk about their mama, and you better listen. You better listen. And yeah, it's just I just happen to do it for a living. That's the only difference.
I mean, I'm always struck by. I mean, I've been reading a lot of stuff recently. I wrote a book called Ghost Soldiers recently by Hampton Sides. It's a fascinating story about the rescue of the prisoners who survived the Bataan Death March. You know, and it is when some of them were dying, the last words, "Mama," you know, were the last words before they would, you know, that connection.
Oh yeah. Well, they would. I'm convinced that if I had at any point not wanted to listen, you know, that would have been the worst betrayal of everything I wrote. I mean, if I, they see their mama and they see their grandfather in those people, and that's good.
Yeah.
That's good. I'm happy.
Do you read? I mean, do you look? Do you read? Do you think about Faulkner? Do you think about Eudora Weldy? Do you think about Reynolds Price? Do you think about these great Southern writers who have talked about the South and all the things that their themes are your themes and your themes are their themes? They're novelists in some cases, essayists in other cases.
Sure. I think you borrow from, like, you know, I'm a huge fan of Larry McMurtry,
right?
Who creates characters better than anybody.
Who says about this, a lovely book with a certain gritty grandeur. This is a worthy successor.
It's very kind of him to say that. But you know, I spent a week in Clearwater, Florida, with no TV, no anything. I was waiting for my furniture to get there, and all I had was a paperback copy of Lonesome Dove, and I read it twice. And it was just as good.
One for interest and second for style.
Right. And you know, Willie Morris, such a sweet, beautiful writer. Pat Conroy writes about families well. So you soak up all that, and you soak up the best you can. But I don't always feel a connection sometimes with some of the writers about the Deep South, like Faulkner, because I went to Faulkner's house and took a tour through it.
In Oxford.
In Oxford. And I saw his riding boots sitting, you know, standing up in one of the bedrooms. And I think I realized right then, of course I always knew it, but that we approach the South from completely different directions.
How so?
Well, I think there's a view from the veranda.
Yes, that's Faulkner.
Right, and then there's a view from where you are if you're laying up under the car working on the transmission, and you see people because you've been under there working on the transmission. You know, I haven't laid up under a Torino in a long time, but
a Ford Torino.
Right, Ford Torino. But you know,
you can live a long and happy life.
Right, I think I can live the rest of my life and never have anything else to do with a Ford Torino. But I do know these folks from I've done pick and shovel work, and I was in the cotton field with my mama.
Yeah.
So it gives you a perspective, I think, that really helps you create, you know, put a face on people like Charlie.
Listen to this. This is such a great story from Pat Conroy. And it's complimentary to you, so you can be embarrassed if you like. Rick Bragg writes like a man on fire, and all over but the shouting is a work of art. I thought of Melville, I thought of Faulkner, but I love the English language and know I was reading one of the best books I'd ever read. By explaining his life to the world, Rick Bragg explains part of my life to me. I fell in love with his mother 100 times. I wept when the book ended. I never met Rick Bragg in my life, but I called him up and told him he'd written a masterpiece, and I sent flowers to his mother. Now, there is a great man to do that.
Yeah. He actually came to visit her. And all my aunts all sat in the living room, and he sat there. He brought her half a German chocolate cake. I'm still not sure where the other
Yes.
I'm still not sure where the other half came from. But he.
That's my first question next time I see him.
Right. Well,
who the hell had the other half?
Well, he pays me back for that every chance he gets. Every now and then I'll call him, and of course he's never there. So I talk to the answer machine, and then I'll get this call out of the blue, and it'll be, "Bragg, this is Conroy. Just trying to keep this dying friendship alive."
Great.
Yeah.
Your mother, she came here for the Pulitzer Prize ceremony.
Right.
Well, and first time she'd ever been on a plane.
Right.
First time she'd ever been in an elevator.
First time she'd ever been in first time she'd ever been in an elevator. First time she'd ever been on an escalator.
Escalator. Maybe elevator, but not escalator.
Right.
So what was this like?
Oh, it was heaven. I mean, for me it was heaven. For her, I'm sure it was horrible. But you know, Mama, you know, grew up all up and down the Alabama-Georgia corridor, down through there. But she was terrified and tickled to death. People told me she would like the trip to New York a lot more when it was done. And I didn't know what they meant by that. I didn't. You know, they said she'll really like it when it's over.
You can think about it.
Exactly, and that was exactly what happened. She had a great time. You know, we were in Atlanta the next week, and we were walking through downtown Atlanta, and she kind of looked around and said, "Well,
it's not New York."
Yeah,
or something.
Now them some buildings, you know. So yeah, it was, and she was spoiled. I think she had her first ever dessert buffet.
Oh.
And my mother has a sweet tooth, and she
Well, see, I'm surprised by that because dessert buffets are all over the South.
well, but see, we don't. Mama eats what she cooks. Mama doesn't like to go to restaurants.
Oh, I see. She only cooks.
Yeah, she eats what she
because she likes her cooking best.
She likes her cooking best, and she cooks for her sisters, and she cooks for us. I was there last week, and she said, "Honey, I didn't cook. Sorry, we don't have anything to eat. All I've got is some fresh green beans, some fresh corn, some hot cornbread, and some sliced tomatoes, and some sweet tea. And that's all." She said, "That's all I've got."
That's all I've got.
I said, "Well, you're
gonna go hungry, boy."
Right. And it was pretty good.
The New York Times. How you doing over there?
Well, we're having fun.
Yeah, that's good. The relationship's good.
Oh yeah.
You like those people?
Yeah, I mean the great thing about the Times is you're always gonna get pointed at a good story. You don't have to sit around and wonder about whether or not you're going to get pointed at a good story.
You mean they know the game?
Right. And I've had a ball. It's like every other thing. You hit a slippery spot every now and then. But right now, I kind of roam around, try to find the best stories I can find, and I'm having fun. Spent some time in the Mississippi Delta. Spent some time in the Midwest.
Can you roam all over?
I can roam all over. Yeah.
Internationally as well?
I don't think they really want me to do that. I think they would worry about me getting lost.
Now, would you like Johnny Apple's job now? I mean, in other words, at some point in your career, would you like sort of going around the world eating your heart out?
Oh, I'd go around the world eating my heart out right now, but I don't know anything about food, and Johnny does.
He knows everything.
Yeah, he knows everything about it. And now
he was just out with Alice Waters. I mean, it was just.
Oh yeah, when he goes to eat, he actually knows what he's eating.
Yeah, I know.
When I go to eat, I say, "Boy, ain't this tasty?"
I know. He wrote a piece about it was a great French restaurant. And it was amazing. I mean, little as I knew. I mean, he had it knocked.
Well, that's one of the reasons why being at the Times is so much fun, because you'll be reading, for instance, like I was reading our election coverage.
Yeah.
And you read people who actually know what they're talking about.
Yes.
And I wasn't one of them. My job was to stand in the parking lot and get quotes. I was high on the totem pole during the election coverage. But
human element.
Right. Yeah, that was my job. But
it is amazing. Isn't it?
Yeah, there are just so many.
I mean,
people.
well, Friedman is on this program.
I just saw.
I mean, he knows some stuff, doesn't he? He
they
writes with a certain authority.
And they all do, and you read it, and you just kind of feel like, what do I know? And then it occurs to you, everybody's got their niche. I do a lot of stories about people in trouble. I do a lot of stories about simple themes, but people with kind of complicated lives, and I like that.
A storyteller's born, you think?
I think some of them are.
But you can be it without being born with it.
Yeah, I think you can learn it, and I think I'm certainly no expert on it, but I grew up at the knee of the best storytellers on earth. The best pure storytellers on earth. My uncles, my aunts. Ava was a great storyteller, and so I grew up with them, but it took me a long time to figure out how to do it in a newspaper. Yeah. But you see an awful lot of people who just approach it differently. Stories no better, no worse. It's just approached different.
What's the best thing you say about Ava?
Well, Ava was interesting. When she didn't have to be strong and tough, she wasn't. But when she did have to be strong and tough, she just stepped right up. When Charlie died, she had never chopped wood before, really. When Charlie died, she went out and she looked at the wood pile, and she had the axe in her hand, and she just started flailing at it, and the wood would kick off the block and kick into her shins and bloody her legs, and she just kept whacking at it. She wasn't so much cutting wood as beating it to death. And she had the same strength of character that Charlie had. It just manifested itself in a different way.
Great book. Thank you for coming.
No, thank you. I appreciate it.
Rick Bragg, Ava's Man. He wrote All Over But the Shouting. We'll be right back. And remember, Peter Moss. Stay with us.